Ladies and metalfish, this is your superstar, the king of draw style, Daddy Janjo, back for a throwback to March 2002. This time I brought with me a very special guest, B-Sox, Yugioh from Zero, Ben, whatever you want to call him, the meatball to my marinara. And you know why people call it marinara? Because they love saying it. Marinara. Yugioh from Zero has a YouTube channel where he covers each meta in Yu-Gi-Oh! Via breakdowns, duels, and tournaments in that specific order, and as of this recording, he has just about 800 subscribers, so hopefully by this time this video comes out, he'll have at least 100. Anyways, I brought him to help dissect Yu-Gi-Oh's earliest meta, a time before the TCG list and before a truly defined format. Yes, I am talking about LOB format, and I gotta say, I lob this period of time for, despite me being a Yu-Gi-Oh purist when it comes to list formats. This one is an exception, for it has a reason to exist without a dedicated list. And recently, Yugioh from Zero held the first modern LOB format tournament, albeit his locals. So what better time to discuss the meta and direction of Yu-Gi-Oh's first meta scene? But I've talked for long enough. Zero, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Janjo. Happy to be here. And I just want to say, pun game on point. So, yeah, this was great. Almost as on point as some of the decks that we saw in the locals. There were some crazy decks that popped up, things that I had not anticipated by any means. Because I'd gone over the format on my channel like a long time ago, and we'd seen some surprises there. Going into it, I thought that the format would just be sort of like Playground, Yu-Gi-Oh!, sort of Skull Redbird beatdown, and just be filled with mirror matches of that. But then we discovered that Exodia is actually extremely strong and very scary.
Yeah, I think when you originally covered LOB in some of your very first content, which is wild going back to, you go back to, and it's kind of amazing how much the channel has changed since then. Befitting the card game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Rather quite nicely anyways. We did see some decks around there, you know, Beatdown, Exodia, a couple of more gimmicky strategies around there. And I think the fact that we finally saw some sort of higher level meta play is really exciting, especially over 20 years later after the fact.
Oh yeah, and it's crazy how the meta has evolved from that point too, because I left my coverage of that format thinking, okay, Exodia, you know, probably best deck, and aggro games can occasionally take a win off them, because I was thinking of aggro as sort of like just, you know, playing a bunch of normal summonable guys hitting in, because with 3 Raigeki, 3 Dark Hole, you're never going to have monsters to be out like, you know, Curse of Dragon, which is the highest one tribute monster in the set in terms of attack. People cooked and they came up with new ideas, and they came up with a new type of aggro deck, and actually 2 decks from that arose, Gaia and also Blue Eyes / Dark Magician Turbo. And the ideas behind these were either fusion summoning out Gaia, the Dragon Champion, or getting enough cards in hand to discard Blue Eyes or Dark Magician at the end of your turn, and then using like triple Monster Reborn, or some amount of Monster Reborns, just go for game. And it's very innovative and very, very cool to see.
Yeah, it's really cool, especially considering that we've seen in the past the use of Monster Reborn since this is pre-list. Every card from the only set available at this time, which was Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, everything is available at 3 copies. And a lot of the times you tend to see Monster Reborn used as that final game push. It's like the original BLS. You use it, get a bunch of these high attack monsters, and just finish off the game when you feel safe to do so. And I think the cool thing with the recent Blue Eyes deck is that it uses a mechanic that most decks don't really, as far as my knowledge, never really touch, which is discarding due to hand size. And I think that's incredibly unique and just really fun to see, especially during this format when, like you said, it kind of feels like a, you know, like a rock, paper, scissors kind of format.
And it's just so innovative. And actually, when people were first talking about that deck idea in the Discord, because we have a Discord where we run the tournaments and sort of discuss these formats, people were doubting the power of the Blue Eyes Dark Magician deck. It's like, you gotta wait a couple turns to get that amount of cards in hand, and then you have to not do anything during those turns, or else you'll not be able to discard Blue Eyes or Dark Magician. And I was one of those naysayers as well. I was like, on paper, this deck didn't make sense to me. But watching it in the tournament, it was actually pretty cool because with triple Pot of Greed, you can actually get to over 7 cards in hand pretty easily. And if you're facing something like Exodia, then you don't really need to be doing anything on your turns. You can just be setting up for that big OTK push. There's no Woboku in this format, no real forms of like battle interruption. The only trap that really does something is Trap Hole. Although Dragon Capture Jar is starting to see more play now that things like Blue Eyes or Guy the Dragon Champion are seeing play. And that's just so awesome because Dragon Capture Jar is a card that like just felt so anime that it's like translating over to the TCG, it was like, oh, well, it's just an anime fun card. Dragons aren't threatening enough to actually play it.
Yeah, and you're mentioning Dark Magician, in which a lot of people watching this probably think, why are you running Dark Magician if you can summon a monster this way via discarding and Monster Reborn? Why not stick with Blue Eyes White Dragon? Well, you mentioned Dragon Capture Jar. Sometimes we see game 2, you side out the Blue Eyes for Dark Magician, and all of a sudden that Dragon Capture Jar your opponent sided into is essentially dead.
Yeah, it's such a cool strategy. And smokescreen sides, like beyond just the Dark Magician Blue Eyes thing, are such a big thing in this format too. That you can really, like, in a given match, you can switch from that Blue Eyes Dark Magician aggro to regular aggro to maybe even Exodia. It's just, you know, playing an Exodia deck out of the sideboard. And make things really unpredictable. And it makes decks like this so powerful because if your opponent can sort of set up for it in advance, then you're a bit hampered in what you can do with your OTK pushes. If there's the element of surprise, you can really catch them off guard and just manage to win the game off that.
Yeah, and seeing something like Blue Eyes White Dragon and Dark Magician being able to take a local tournament win, it's very anime, and I think that's what a lot of people like about it, especially considering that going in, I don't know if I want to say popular, but the kind of the hyped up deck people were thinking might have been more prevalent was Exodia. Now, why was that?
Well, Exodia, on paper, it seems like it would be really bad because, you know, there's no way to search out all the pieces, and the only draw cards are really Pot of Greeds. And so you'd think, well, okay, this deck is kind of dead in the water because what if your piece is at the bottom of your deck? Then you're never going to draw it. Well, it turns out if you play 3 of each piece, unintuitively, this actually makes the deck a lot better because, you know, if you draw excess pieces, you can just set them on field and just use them as, like, chump blockers. And also, if you play multiple pieces, then your odds of drawing them are higher. And they're actually high enough that most Exodia games I've seen, you can get Exodia in the top half of your deck. Definitely not all games. You can just lose a game because 3 pieces wind up at the bottom. But it actually has a shockingly high success rate. And that's just so cool because Exodia is another anime card that people didn't expect would do this well.
Yeah, and I'm one who I hate those stally defensive decks. But again, keep in mind that in this format with LOB, every card is at 3 copies. This includes Dark Hole, this includes Raigeki, Fissure, Trap Hole, all these really simple yet still impact cards that if you play your cards right, it really can mean a difference of a game, and I think that's an interesting kind of way to look at the format that you might think just may be a caveman go bonk type of game state.
Yeah, and it's so different from like stall decks in later formats as well, because Exodia, you actually have a win condition like that you're trying to get to quickly. Like you're not necessarily trying to stall, you're trying to hang on for long enough that you actually win, as opposed to later decks where, you know, you've got your floodgates up, you know, you're just trying to prevent your opponent from doing anything. You can't really prevent your opponent from doing much in this format, so you just kind of gotta pray. And it makes it so much more anime when you just heart of the cards your way to all 5 Exodia pieces, and it's just really cool.
I think part of the reason why, almost surprisingly, we didn't see quite as many at the tournament was due to, I want to say 2 reasons. Of course, I wasn't part of it. I was busy, unfortunately. so I can't say for the duels themselves. Maybe not everyone wants to play that kind of defensive deck. I feel like more aggro decks tend to be a little more popular throughout the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! As well as people just wanting to try out like new strategies. But before we get to that, let's talk about the kind of standard beatdown decks that you typically would see.
Yeah, and they're actually pretty interesting too, you know? Like, I sort of, looked down on them initially when I thought Exodia was the top deck because they have a tough time against Exodia. They can't really easily get over the 2K defenders without using like Regeki and Dark Holes and stuff because the highest attack in a level 4 monster is 1550, and that's Skull Redbird, and right below it is Urabi at 1500. Then you get into like 1400 monsters like Celtic Guardian and Witty Phantom. And, a standard sort of aggro deck is just playing these cards, and it's hoping to use like Dark Hole, Raigeki, etc., and just chip in with enough damage to whittle your opponent down. It's a very fun, like, sort of playground Yu-Gi-Oh! Style of play, but it can't quite do enough against the stall decks like Exodia. However, among the sort of standard playground aggro decks, there are also some variations. You can go the equip route, maybe doing something like Fiend Equip or Warrior Equip, using equip cards on things like Witty Phantom or Celtic Guardian. I think Fiend Equip is probably better than the Warrior Equip because you've also got Trail of Nightmare, the 1300. And Janjo, you yourself actually, you were sort of, I think, the main person who's experimented with this sort of thing.
Yeah, back in January of this year, I believe, in my short-lived 3-episode Wheel of Duel series.
I mean, quality over quantity, right? And those were some good episodes. So
duels don't do well on my channel.
Yeah, but if any watchers are interested, go back to see those old games because I think they do sort of show like what this format can be like.
I think there was also one that they missed that I believe we did see in the tournament, which was Follow Wind, which does really give a strong boost to that Skull Redbird.
Yeah, just enabling it to get over your opponent's Skull Redbirds. That may seem like such a minor thing, but it can really be powerful in this format. And just getting in that extra bit of damage too. Because, if you look at something like Yugi Kaiba, which is the first sort of like widely played format, you have like Lojin and Battleox and Neo, and all of these have over 1600 attack, which is exactly 1/5 of your opponent's life points. So that means that, in the course of 5 attacks directly, you can whittle your opponent down to nothing. However, in LOB, 1550 doesn't quite reach that threshold. And so even if you attack 5 times with Skull Redbird, that won't kill your opponent. A Follow Wind can make the difference in a case like that. And so it's really cool to see it getting play.
Yeah, of course, the main problem with decks like these is that when you lose a card to a Dark Hole or a Curse of Dragon or what have you, you're losing 2 cards with that. You're losing the monster and you're losing the equip. And sometimes you could not draw into the equip when needed. Sometimes you can draw into too many equips and they're dead cards, what could otherwise be better cards. And this is where something like Field Magic can come in, where you don't need to rely on the monster with that. But that in itself brings in advantages and disadvantages too.
Yeah, and field spells are another active area where people are experimenting in this. Like I featured on my channel when I covered this format, I featured Sogen aggro, which is basically using Sogen to buff up your Celtic Guardians, hoping that if your opponent is playing sort of this standard aggro deck, they're playing Witty Phantoms as their 1400 monster of choice. And it's very similar to like Umi Turbo, or not Umi Turbo, but Umi Beatdown and Yugi Kaiba, where you're playing Great Whites with Umi to get over your opponents like Neos and Battleoxes. And I think it actually does have a pretty effective matchup against a regular standard beatdown deck. But as you say, it does have flaws because if your opponent is playing Celtic Guardians, then they get the boost from that Sogen as well. So you've really got to watch the metagame if you want to play a field spell deck, because you've got to know what your opponent is likely to be playing in terms of beaters, and you've got to play the opposite of that.
Yeah, and similarly to something like Dark Energy and Follow Wind, we've also sometimes see Mountain get used now and again. Again, with Skull Redbird, we also have Tyhone, I believe, which can also get a boost. But it's definitely not as popular as some of the other strategies we've seen.
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of awkward, too, because, like, everyone's playing Skull Redbird, and so it doesn't give you, like, too much of an edge. And also, Tyhone is a cool monster, but it's more defensive than offensive. with like 1400 defense, I believe, which, under Mountain can wall up against some things. But, if you're playing a standard aggro deck, you want to be getting aggressive. So people haven't really experimented with that as much, but there are some benefits to it. Like if you're playing Curse of Dragons as well, then that actually can get a Curse of Dragon up over like a Giant Soldier Stone or an Aqua Mador, which is a really tough thing for a lot of decks to do. So there are some potential fringe benefits, and I hope that people do experiment with that sort of style of deck in the future, because I think there might be potential there.
And with Sogen, you can also defend with Beaver Warrior, which has 1500 defense normally. Yeah, it's so cool seeing a format where cards like Uraby, Skull Red Bird, Celtic Guardian are all playable. And it's not something like Volume 1 OCG Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it's, you have some 1200s and then a couple higher, and that's kind of it. You do have a variety of cards to use, and one of those fun cards we've actually seen some strategies with recently is polymerization.
Yeah, and people have been trying this out, not just with Gaia, which we mentioned earlier, but I also saw one duelist playing it with Flower Wolf, which is a very interesting choice. But I see why they'd go the Flower Wolf route, because Gaia the Dragon Champion takes both Gaia and also Curse of Dragon, and those are both monsters that you can't easily bring out once they're in your hand. Now, the benefit of this, if you're the Gaia Fusion deck, is you play some polymerizations, bring out a Gaia the Dragon Champion, and then you Monster Reborn back, your Gaia or your Curse, and then get in for a lot of damage that way. But Flower Wolf sort of takes a different approach, because its fusion materials are monsters that you can actually just bring out for free. You can just normal summon them. So while it may not be able to get in as much damage, it's still a very formidable monster. And if you back it up with something like a Forest, then that can buff it up even more. So a very interesting sort of take. That deck didn't do the best in the locals, but I'm sure that, people seeing that deck and like seeing what could potentially be there, I'm sure that it will get more experimentation in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Firewolf, it does have a decent attack. It can't beat over a lot of defender monsters, but at least with its fusion materials, they're not too weak, where at least you can still relatively poke with them. And I think it does have strengths in of itself, but when we look at a deck like Gaia the Dragon Champion, yes, it does have bricks, but when you get the Gaia the Dragon Champion out and you use cards like Monster Reborn, suddenly you can start dealing hefty amount of damage in kind of a way that we never really considered up until this point.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that made the Blue Eyes Dark Magician decks do well, in that if you're facing a deck like Exodia, which is not hitting in, and thus you don't really have much of a timer besides just the deck's natural draw power, you can afford to wait with those bricks, and you can afford to just set up for that big OTK turn and just kill your opponent out of nowhere. So it's definitely a very different sort of format when it comes to conceptualizing brick cards in hand. And I think that's really cool, because this is, I think, the only format in the game's history which is like this that I can think of.
Yeah, and plus with polymerization, you can actively send these monsters to the graveyard, as opposed to Blue Eyes White Dragon, in which either, unless you get it on field first, you have to discard it with hand size.
Yeah, and that was a big reason why I think going into this tournament, people thought, decks in this sort of category, which, isn't quite standard aggro, but it's more just like OTK aggro, let's call it. Decks like this, people thought Gaia was the forerunner, because, it's much more proactive than Dragons. It can actually be doing things all the time. You don't have to wait for hand size to be met. And I do still think it's a very good option if you're going for this sort of OTK aggro strat. But the interesting thing about these OTK aggro strats as well is that they have a bit of a tough time against a standard aggro deck, because the standard aggro decks can still poke in and actually get you on a timer. And if you're bricking with things in hand, then that might be enough.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these decks was interesting just seeing what kind of ratios of cards we seed. Some duelists would play stop defense to really just see what they're dealing with, maybe activate opposing man-eater bugs. Some duelists would use a lot of armed ninjas to take care of those swords of revealing light. Maybe a duelist may not play fissure, or maybe they won't play trap hole. I thought that was really interesting to see just the ratios in a format you typically expect. Oh, of course they're going to play 3 of every power card. Well, maybe not so much.
Yeah, you got to make a lot of choices here. In the topping list, the sort of Blue Eyes and Dark Magician aggro deck, it was actually playing no swords, no trap holes. It was just completely focused in on Exodia because it was like, you know what? I think Exodia is going to be the most represented deck in this tournament, and I think my deck can beat Exodia. So I don't need cards that, are bad against Exodia. I just want to maximize my aggressive power. And it worked out for them. They actually did not see many sorts of standard aggro decks in their tournament run, and they were able to win the game. And it was just awesome to see.
Yeah, even such an early format did have meta calls, and I think that's really fascinating to see in something like LOB, where you kind of expect it to be very simple, very basic, and what we got was really anything but. When you look at all the decks we saw, and also decks that we could possibly see: Beatdown, Blue Eyes, Exodia, Quip, Fusion, Field. Like, it's such a variety, and I think it's really... That's what really made me love Yugi Kaiba format, was taking this really old format and showing, hey, there's a lot to this that you may not see at first.
Yeah, and I think that's the best part about exploring a lot of these old, especially like the DM era formats, because I feel like people dismiss them out of hand a lot of the time. And that's just really sad because there really is a lot of depth here. I think a lot of people would really enjoy these sorts of formats for what they provide. And so I'm glad that in this tournament it showed off that, hey, there actually is a very interesting metagame here besides just, sort of playground Yu-Gi-Oh stuff.
And it's definitely the kind of play style that you don't see come Yugi Kaiba format, because all these cards like Dark Hole, Raigeki, Pot of Greed, all these cards will get hit to one copy. So when you're playing this deck, it's like, oh, I got all these insane power cards, and it's really explosive and really fun in that regard. Until you're playing Exodia, then you get obliterated. But, like, I mean, come on.
Yeah, even then, it's like, I think this is the perfect anime format, because, like, if you lose to, like, I don't know, a Degenerate Burn deck or Stall Mill in Yugi Kaiba, it can feel a little bad, because it's just, you might feel like you didn't really have control over the game at any point, and you just weren't allowed to play. But against an Exodia deck, you're like, well, okay, I got obliterated, but... it's Exodia. I mean, that's just so cool. So you can't even be, like, too mad about it.
Yeah, part of this being, like, a pre-format thing, I think lets people kind of have a little bit of a reprieve from more competitive environments, even if there still is competitiveness involved any way you play Yu-Gi-Oh! I just think having all these kind of crazy stuff, it almost reminds me of, like, Teledad in a way, but...
And, I mean, I think that's part of the fun. Like... That's why it's nice to sort of try out these old formats for yourself and just know what they each feel like. So that way, if you're in the mood for something like this, you can just dive in and play it. Because I do think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Offers a lot of different ways to play it. And sometimes, you'll be playing, I don't know, Master Duel. And you'll be like, man, I really am sort of tired of the modern meta. I'm not the biggest fan of the decks that we're playing and stuff like that. I wish the deck could be, more... anime or more grindy or more what have you. And going back to these old formats, I think you can really find those sorts of things.
So with that said, what would you personally like to see from LOB format moving forward?
I think going forward, I really want to see just how people adapt the sort of standard aggro decks to face these sort of OTK aggro decks. Because I really do think that the standard sort of playground style, just playing a bunch of level 4 monsters and hitting in, I think those style of decks can really put up a fight against the just sort of OTK decks. We didn't really get to see that in this locals, and I think that, with the Blue Eyes Dark Magician deck winning, I think that, the next time we hold a tournament in this, that definitely will be highly represented. So I think that people will be shifting to standard aggro, and I really am curious to see what they come up with for that.
With that said, what's your favorite deck? Which one do you kind of lean towards to?
In terms of just, my favorite, not necessarily the best, I love Sogen Aggro, just because I think it's such a neat deck idea. Just, the same reason why I really like Umi Beatdown in Yugi Kaiba as well. It's just so cool that it's kind of like a meta call in a format that is just so chaotic.
Oh yeah, honestly, when I saw that Sogen Aggro video, because I actually started watching her stuff at my old job when I was at work, just like on the side, because I tend to just watch like the smaller channels. I'm like, oh, Sogen Aggro, like what is this?
Yeah.
When you think of LOB originally from the outset, you just kind of think, oh, just beat down, like that's it. Then you see Silgrin, like, oh, no, that actually makes sense. And I feel that spark of inspiration recently when I saw and heard about the Gaia OTK and thought, Gaia, what? And I saw in action, like, oh my god, this actually works. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to see what people will come up with, because, like, you know, in a vacuum, like, if you're just looking at these things like by yourself, you can come up with a lot of ideas, but you know, you're just going to be in your own head, right? And this is something that I dealt with in the early days of my channel, where I was just sort of doing it all in my own head. And I didn't really have people to sort of bounce all these ideas off of. But now in the Discord, people are coming up with like crazy ideas, like the Gaia OTK that you mentioned. And they just, you know, keep innovating. It's really awesome to see that. I really think that the best ideas for these sorts of decks come from having a community and having people just to, you know, say, what if we did this? And then just bouncing ideas off. And that's really cool to see. Yeah, so in terms of final thoughts, just, you know, if anything in this video has intrigued you, definitely just try out LOB format. You don't even have to go into a public space and do it. You can just find some friends and do it, because it's, you know, very easy to get people into, and just try out a game or two. And I think that if you try out a game or two, you might actually really enjoy it, because there's a lot here. So I encourage you to do that. In terms of plugs, if you do want to try it out in a community with multiple people, there is the Yugioh from Zero Discord, which is a great place to play games in that format and a variety of other niche formats that you can't really play anywhere else. And also, you know, check out my YouTube channel as well if you're interested in this. The YouTube channel is also Yugioh from Zero, and I have videos on this format and many others, so definitely check that out if you're interested. Yeah,
and thank you for coming on here. I know I've been on some of your videos in the past via some very specific duels, but this is the first time I've been on this channel, and it's finally good to have you on here. And hopefully more people will see this video, perhaps get inspired and play more LOB and just kind of retro Yu-Gi-Oh in general. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's the hope, and thank you so much for having me on to spread the message of LOB. So yeah, I look forward to more collabs in the future as well.
All right, thank you. And for everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your day.